Hello everyone, and welcome to this. This is your Politics 1010 midterm exam preparation guide, and what we're looking at here on the screen right now is the document that you can find on Blackboard, which will guide you through the exam. If you use this guide correctly, what you'll find yourself doing is putting together some flashcards based on the question prompts that you will see in this document, and my job today in this video is to help you prepare those flashcards by giving you some pointers on how to think about the various questions. And the idea is that combined with this video and your putting together of the flashcards, you get a pretty good revision technique. And I won't be giving you the answers, of course. That's not something I can do in the interest of fairness in this video. It is an exam after all. So in this video, you have an opportunity to hear me talk you through some of the questions. And as we go through the questions, I will point out little bits of information that might be helpful. Of course, it will still be up to you to go and study for the exam, but that certainly will be helped by that process of studying will certainly be helped by this video, I believe. So flashcards I think are very, very important. Now, some information you need in order to take the exam, as you can see here, you should book your test using this link. You can also use this phone number here. At the OUC Test Center, Julie Rosenbauer is our person administering the OUC Test Center. She'll be the one to help you log into Blackboard 9.0, one of her staff members. And she'll have a password that will enable the exam for you. I should stress that the test is a closed book exam. You will not be allowed to have any study materials with you at your desk. You should be able to have some blank paper and a pencil if that would be helpful, but you should not be using any sort of notes or any textbooks from outside of the exam hall. So the exam will be available for the full week, and you will be able to take your exam at any time during these hours: Monday to Wednesday 9 to 5, Thursday 9 to 8, Friday 9 to 5, and you will have 90 minutes to take the exam. You should try to start your exam no later than 2 hours from the close of any of the 1 days that we have. Chapters that we're covering from the textbook are listed here. As you'll see, they map onto the textbook chapters as they're mentioned week by week in the syllabus. Other materials which may be on the exam include the videos that we watched in class. As I mentioned to you, these videos would be on the exam, and indeed there's a question from each one of the videos on the exam. If you want to catch up, or if you missed a day that we were in class, then you can catch up by watching Boogeyman, the Leah Older story, on Hulu, I think, or Netflix. It's certainly on Netflix. The John Stewart Crossfire video, which we looked at in the media section, is available to you at the YouTube link here. And Casino Jack is also available on YouTube for you to watch in its entirety. So we look through the list of questions now, and we again see the importance of preparing flashcards and quizzing ourselves daily before taking the exam. If you give yourselves a full week to prepare for this, you will be successful. There's just no other way about it. It's important to take this exam seriously, to prepare the flashcards for yourselves, and to quiz yourself daily. If you do that, you'll be fine, and it doesn't take much preparation. So the first question is, from what Greek words do we derive the term democracy? And the answer, of course, if you remember from the reading, is to break down the word democracy into its constituent subparts and try to, you'll see a list, and if you read that, you'll see that there's one part of the word that means the people and the other part of the word that means to rule. So you'll be able to figure that one out, I think. What is the definition of the elite? I think that's a pretty straightforward question. You're going to be presented with a question here that will require you to know what the definition of the elite is. Typically, we think of it as a minority of people who have a tremendous amount of wealth, and they govern or manipulate the apparatus of government in a democracy, for example, in order to produce legislation that suits their best interests. How was the institution of slavery handled at the Constitutional Convention? We discussed that in class, and as you know, one of the only ways through which the members signing the Constitutional Convention could agree was to have a sort of an agreement to disagree on the question of slavery. And so you should have a look at your reading for that. What revenue sources did Great Britain use to pay for debt incurred during the French and Indian War? We have a variety of taxes that were introduced. You should look through the readings to find out what those taxes were. What did opponents of the new constitution call themselves? As you know, we were looking at this and a little bit in our lecture as well on the question of federalism versus anti-federalism. How did the Articles of Confederation envision the relationship between the states and the Union? Well, as we discussed in our lecture, when the United States was originally formed, prior to its being formed actually during the era of the revolutionary government, the various people who were involved in politics at that time tended to refer to the United States as these United States, and that's the important aspect that you need to focus on here. So were there ways in which the federal government could be said to exist yet? And the answer to that would most likely be no. So with no federal government, that speaks to something of the relative autonomy, almost as independent nation states, that the constituent states actually had. The Declaration of Independence borrowed heavily from the theories of which philosopher? In this class, we've discussed a lot of different philosophers. We've discussed Thomas Hobbes, we've discussed John Locke, we've discussed John Dewey. When Jefferson was putting together the Declaration of Independence, he was influenced by other philosophers, apart from the one we have in mind, including Montesquieu. Dewey was, of course, not born yet for ages and ages, so he's not really relevant to our discussion. But the Declaration of Independence certainly did borrow heavily from the theories of a certain philosopher, and we discussed this in class. What were the main ethical principles asserted in the Declaration of Independence? Well, it's a matter of some controversy, but we discussed in class Jefferson's vision for the Declaration, that it would include the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, as a sort of a framework of basic rights. And that was, of course, subject to a lot of revision and drafting in the Declaration, but the words we're chasing here are the words that ended up in the actual Declaration itself. What was the Virginia Plan? Well, the Virginia Plan, we were just discussing a moment ago, the Articles of Confederation. What made the United States a union? What made it one country? And what principles did it involve, this Virginia Plan? You'll have to think about the Virginia Plan in relationship to the needs of a new country coming into existence. And what would that country be able to do, and must it be able to do, in order to guarantee its sovereignty? We move on to the theme of public opinion now, and we of course discussed Lee Atwater becoming famous as an effective manager of public opinion. Through what means? Well, you may remember that he encouraged attention to the personal character of election candidates, often trying to give the public cause to doubt the personal character and integrity of many of the candidates. He used hard edge techniques. We discussed in relation to the video the concept of the wedge issue. We also discussed the possibility that he would manage a campaign based not so much on sticking to the issues, but on creating diversions, creating controversies to distract the public. So what reasons do elite Democrats offer for not trusting public opinion? We've discussed this in relation to the Lee Atwater documentary, but also I think in relation to other things as well. The reasons the elite Democrats offer for not trusting public opinion is that they consider it to be somewhat irrational. They feel that the public has not the education or the intellectual capacity to reason on the complex issues of the day, especially in our own highly technological and highly technical time. Who called public opinion a great beast? We mentioned the name of an American president here, Alexander Hamilton. What were the philosopher John Dewey's principal beliefs about public opinion? He was a great believer in education and a great believer in the idea that if you gave people responsibility and empowered them, gave them the opportunity to manage their own affairs, that they would rise to the occasion. That if you keep them in the dark, if they don't have enough information, in other words, kind of like the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you treat the public like a great beast, it will act like one. If you treat it like it is, reverent and special, it will rise to the occasion. If you give it education and information, it will become rational. What term do we use to refer to the collection of voluntary associations that lie between the private realm of the individual and family, and the public sphere of politics? Well, there is a idea that there's a kind of a group or a type of phenomena that exists between the realm of the private individual and the realm of the public sphere, in the sense of it being politics proper. And that tends to be associations. We discussed Tocqueville and his discovery of American political life as he traveled around the country, and his observations about the importance of voluntary associations. You will be looking in and around the discussion in the literature for a term which captures that notion of a space between the realm of the individual and the realm of the public sphere, as we call it. So, what are the principal characteristics of American political culture? We have just been discussing this to some extent, but it goes back to Tocqueville. The idea that Americans are great participants in voluntary associations. They are self-driven. They come together to resolve local issues with gusto. And one of the things we've been anxious about in relation to our reading of Bowling Alone, or our discussion of the book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, who recently died, is that this participative nature might be in decline. And if it is, then that does not bode well for American political culture. What are the main shapers of political orientation in the United States? Well, you know from discussion in class with me that things like the family, things like schools are tremendously important shapers of political orientation in the United States. What are the main statistical points of disagreement between liberals and conservatives in terms of the economy? Well, obviously, the classic disagreement is to do with the amount of government intervention there should be in the economy in order to generate demand in order to provide jobs. And of course, because that involves raising taxes, a lot of people who are conservative tend to disagree with that because they see it as a violation of their personal freedom. Liberals tend to see freedom as being something more to do with enablement and actualization, so hence they will disagree on that point. Studies of political socialization in our schools show what important fact about non-college bound students? Generally that our institutions tend to anticipate for these students the direction that they're going, talk to them like they're different, give them different opportunities, and create a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for them, which many people say kind of condemns them to a whole way of life that they will never escape. Because once you've sort of fallen into that path, it dominates your destiny for the rest of your life. What generalizations can we offer about the political views of lower income Americans? Generally, we would be looking here for things like the fact that they are passive, alienated, disempowered. They feel their vote doesn't matter. They feel their views don't matter. They feel the political system doesn't listen to them. And for that reason, they may feel very antagonistic towards that system. What are the political issues upon which whites and African Americans tend most to disagree? Well, classically, this is to do with issues of distribution. African Americans tend to be more in favor of social justice measures to level the playing field, whereas whites tend to be more conservative and tend to view the economic life as a kind of Horatio Alger type situation where you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make your own opportunities. What political issues are Christian fundamentalists most concerned with? They are very concerned with the way moral values seem to be becoming more relativistic in the country. What objections might a popular Democrat voice in relation to modern polling techniques? Well, without giving you the answer, a popular Democrat is concerned with enabling the people and making sure that they have an adequate opportunity to express their views, but also to deliberate amongst themselves. We go back to John Dewey here, the chance to talk among themselves and discuss their mutually shared problems. And the problem with the modern polling techniques is that they don't allow for that kind of deliberation to take place first. Now, George Gallup, often known as the founding father of the modern polling technique, he believed that that polls could sort of stand in as a proxy for some very important type of activity that Americans traditionally did undertake before an election or before a big vote on a certain issue. And the question is, what were Gallup's views? What institution, what practice did he have in mind in relation to this? What Americans are most likely to vote? Well, generally the wealthier Americans. They are the ones that have the most vested interest, and they feel empowered. They feel their votes matter. They feel that the government listens to them and that their interests are represented, so that's why they vote. What were voting rates like in late 19th century America? We discussed this in the discussion of voting. Robert Putnam would have had an interest in this when we were discussing him as well. But basically, Americans used to participate a lot more in voluntary associations, and they would have been more likely to vote, much more likely to vote, in fact, during the late 19th century. Now, why would an elite Democrat be worried about high voting rates? What would be the problem there? An elite Democrat would be worried about high voting rates because it would be a situation, or it would create a situation whereby less educated people might be voting in large numbers and misunderstanding the complex issues of the day, and thereby creating perhaps opportunities for misguided policies to be passed by, for example, populist politicians who would just tell the people what they want the people to hear. This was kind of Mitt Romney's argument when he made this sort of 45% or 40% argument, the video that leaked in the last election, which showed Mitt Romney saying that he believed that, you know, a significant number of American voters were kind of too stupid to really understand the stakes, and that they would always vote for Obama because they were effectively bought off by populist politics. The authors of our textbook question whether there is actually such a thing as a national election. Why would that be? Well, there's a list of reasons why that might be so, and you should look in the book for them. But to give you a hint, it's to do with the fact that district by district, state by state, there's a lot of divergence in the types of rules that the different districts will use for running their elections. What is the state of associational life in America today? Well, it's no secret, if you've been paying attention so far, that it's in decline. If the new working class has the most to gain from political participation, why does this fastest growing part of the population have low turnout rates? Again, I think we've discussed already in this discussion alienation, the fact that they don't feel that the system listens to them, and that would be a sort of a basis of an answer there. What beliefs do popular Democrats harbor concerning voter turnout? Well, the belief would be that if the poor, for example, don't turn up to vote, then their interests will not be represented. And because the other classes, the wealthier classes, are acting as a class, they're acting as a unified group to protect their interests, to make sure that legislation is passed that protects their interests, the vast majority of people are going to suffer. And that's why, according to popular Democrats, the provision of welfare has been collapsing in this country since the 1970s. The country has been moving more and more to a free market system, despite the fact that people seem to keep saying that the country is socialist. The facts of the matter suggest that whatever socialism there was in the country is disappearing, and disappearing fast. Now, according to the text, what are net roots? Net roots are a kind of a new phenomena that emerges on the basis of there being social networking technology available to people to reach out to each other and communicate with each other around about election time. How do interest group politics differ from electoral politics? Well, the thing about electoral politics is that it's all about appealing to voters. It's all about people on Capitol Hill trying to get the vote out and to generate momentum in favor of specific candidates. Interest group politics are different because they are about interest groups, specific groups with specific interests, for example, private corporate interests, reaching into the halls of power to try to leverage from those in power specific favors, specific types of legislation that they need in order to be able to get the business done that they're seeking to accomplish. Upon what grounds do elite Democrats and popular Democrats disagree on the merits of contemporary interest group system? Well, elite Democrats have a view that, kind of like the free market system, it's the best way for specific interests and groups to continue to voice to government the needs of those specific groups. And after all, it's a level playing field and anyone can do it. So what's the problem? Well, popular Democrats respond to this and say that it's not a level playing field. The free market principle is a nice one in principle, but money tends to shape the system disproportionately, and those who get the loudest voices are usually those with a lot of money and the ability to buy off the politicians. So once you have money and lobbying mixing, that's when you get into trouble. And of course we watched the Casino Jack documentary, which we'll talk about in just a moment, which was a case study in precisely that kind of corruption. Now, according to the text, what is the number of people employed lobbying the federal government in Washington? I'll let you look that one up on your own. Now, according to pluralist theory, why do interest groups not pose a threat to the public good? Well, again, it kind of goes back to this idea of the free market system, the idea being that they cancel each other out, or that public policy will emerge oftentimes from efforts outside of the channels of legislation, such as we know them in the House of Congress, that interest groups may have come to a consensus on how to balance their interests outside of Congress, and then may go together to congressmen in order to present sort of preformed legislation or preformed agreements, which the congressman would then see, okay, looks like these various interest groups all agree with this, they are opposing each other, and therefore I have a good sense that this would not be controversial because so many of these interest groups agree. So that's the idea of bounds of competing interests. But as we learn as we learned in lecture, and as we see here, the famous political scientist Schatzsnyder famously declared that the flaw in pluralist heaven is that the heavenly chorus sings with a strong upper class accent. Now, what does that mean? It means, of course, that generally the pressure groups are favoring the interests of those who have money to pay them. If you don't have the money, you can't play, and that is the main problem. You generally don't find poor people organizing themselves to connect with congressmen through lobbyists, because they just cannot afford it, and they're not organized enough. Now, to which kind of interest group does the collective action problem give most advantage, the public or the private? Well, the collective action problem means generally that it's easier to get people to sign into something that will give them a specific advantage in the marketplace rather than a collective benefit that everyone will share in. So what that means, for example, is when we think of the free rider problem, the idea of the student who won't pay his or her bus ticket to take advantage of the subsidy that, say, a younger child might get on the bus and try to pass off as a younger child. That's exactly the collective action problem. You're seeking to game the system. So the public or the private interest, which benefits the most there? I think it stands to reason that the public interest might not necessarily be served by the collective action problem. So when you're thinking through this question, try to relate to it in those terms. The documentary Casino Jack focuses on the career of Washington, D.C. lobbyist and businessman and convicted criminal Jack Abramov. The documentary looks at many of Abramov's more choice activities as a lobbyist, including his role in the College Republicans, his recruitment of Tom DeLay to promote the Mariana Islands and hide the garment industry's sweatshops there, his alliance with Angolan autocrat Jonas Savimbi, and his partnership with Ralph Reed, who made large amounts of money through links to Indian casinos while simultaneously pontificating against gambling. So, of what phenomena are the events of this movie most likely a case? And that's an important question. You could take this if you were a defender of Jack Abramov as it just being basically the result of scaremongering by an overly liberal media. Or alternatively, you could say that this is simply the story of one overzealous individual who, through his own arrogance and through the sort of selfishness of his immediate friends, who were kind of a few bad apples, they just basically got caught breaking the law and they got what they deserved. But the documentary, I think, makes a more subtle argument than that. It talks about not about the liberal media. It takes seriously, in fact, that these guys really did break the law, and they systematically bragged about breaking the law, and they were bragging about the fact that weak people deserve to be steamrollered and this kind of thing. So there was a culture there. It wasn't just a case of a few bad apples either. And in fact, the documentary really just makes the argument at the end of the day that this is the kind of thing that happens when you leave the lobbying industry unregulated. In the United States, you have a very high-powered free market style lobbying system, as Jack Abramov himself said at the start of the documentary. And in that system, legalized bribery is possible and happens quite a lot. The fact of the matter is that Casino Jack got caught, but that doesn't mean he was the only one. So the few bad apples approach doesn't really work very well, and the idea that this was somehow a creation of the liberal media doesn't work very well. So, what distinguishes public interest groups from other interest groups? Public interest groups believe that what they are working towards is not to represent the interests of one specific entity, like a large corporation or an association of retired people or an industry group of some sort. Specifically, what public interest groups believe that they are doing is putting forward the general interest. Now, you or I may disagree with them about what the general interest is, but they believe they are putting forward the general interest, and I think that's very important. Of course, that could include the NRA, it could include, a Catholic sort of youth lobby, it could include an environmental lobby. So, it could be left-wing or right-wing. A public interest group covers the full spectrum as a concept. Who decides what media is worthy of coverage? That's a great question. We talked about editorial boardrooms. We talked about the fact that the media, at the end of the day, make a lot of decisions about what should be in the headlines and what shouldn't be. And a lot of stuff just doesn't get reported because there's not space, there's not time, or there's not interest. They don't think it would sell advertising. Now, in our textbook, the authors put forward the argument that the media is not doing its job. What puzzle do they mention at the start of their argument to support this notion? Now, this goes, of course, back to the fact that even in 2004, a good deal of people still believed that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, what was yellow journalism? Yellow journalism was a kind of a personal journalism. It was a sensationalized news style, much like we have today, but it was ubiquitous and it was present mostly in the idea in newsprint. So it was to do with newspapers. And of course, the newspaper barons, as they were called, wanted to sell advertising in those newspapers. Now, in the video we watched in class of Jon Stewart's appearance on CNN's show Crossfire, he is critical of the way the show seems to be more interested in supporting the status quo of the two-party system than engaging in meaningful debate. One of the main points he presents to make this argument, that basically, that it's trying to be too much like entertainment, that it is trying too hard to sell advertising, and that it's basically supporting the two-party system. It doesn't really do anything to help people think outside the box. The issues take second place to the show's other functions, which are to provide entertainment, to provide theater, and to support the status quo. Now, what did the Telecommunications Act of 1996 do? It made it easier for media operations to do something with each other, and that's what you've got to research and track down there. And the impact, the significance of that was that it reduced the amount of voices in the media. It reduced the amount of media outlets that there actually existed because they were absorbing each other. Now, how is it that Walmart is able to make such high profits while keeping its prices so low? This goes back to the questions we were discussing, I think, back in our second week, which was the week to do with the economy. I think, or was it week 3? I can't remember right now. But how is it that Walmart is able to make such high profits while keeping its prices so low? Walmart is able to make high profits by not by selling at a high price, because as we know it's very, very cheap. Certainly not by cutting back on customer service, although Walmart has never been known for providing a very high level of customer service. No, typically it's simply down to the fact that Walmart pays very little in terms of its wages. In fact, it's well known that in many states, especially in like California, Walmart employees are often on food stamps, and as such, the government is subsidizing these workers because they make such little money on their minimum wage jobs that they actually need, they count as basically being in poverty. So that's strange, but that's the way things are. The federal government is subsidizing the lives of people who work for Walmart in order for it to be making its high profits. That basically means the federal government is subsidizing the profits of Walmart. So how was Henry Ford's approach to paying his workers different from that of Walmart today? Well, principally, Henry Ford believed that workers who were paid well would buy his cars, buy his vehicles, and keep the economy of the nation floating. So there was this kind of idea of Henry Ford's part that if his workers were good enough in his mind to buy his cars, they were good enough for a good wage. And of course, well-paid workers worked hard, and they were very productive, Henry Ford's auto workers. So they took care of him and he took care of them, and the economy prospered because of that type of approach, because of that type of model. Now, what are the main reasons elite Democrats offer for praising the American market economy? Well, one of the main reasons elite Democrats might praise the market economy is because they believe that it produces a meritocracy, that because those who are successful have to struggle against the odds, that those who have money got it because they earned it, got it because they merited it. So it's really up to them. It's about their voluntary actions. It's about individuals in the marketplace deciding for themselves. Now, of course, popular Democrats would disagree with that, and that's the basis of question 49. They believe that modern corporate capitalism offers people a non-level playing field where power is concentrated at one end and advantage is gained by people at one end. And so why you need redistributive policies is in order to be able to guarantee that people at the other end of the economy get a chance to get ahead, to get a start for themselves. Now, what are the special privileges of corporate organizations? This is a very important question, of course, in this day and age. We've been talking a lot about Citizens United in our reader assignments, but of course this is also discussed in the section on the economy in our textbook as well. So what are the special privileges of corporate organizations? Usually they are bodies not owned by one person, but owned by people who have joint stock in the organization. So there's joint stock ownership. They have limited liability, which means that the corporation can go bankrupt, but not the individuals who run it. And they have continuous legal identity, which means that if I buy them out, as the company in Britain who bought out the chemical corporation in West Virginia there a few months ago, learned when the company had that huge spill a couple of weeks later, they were responsible, even though they had never owned that company, they had never made the decisions that led to the lax practices and non-safe storage of chemicals. When the dam broke that stored those chemicals and it flooded into the valley, the British company was left responsible for those decisions, because that's when you buy a company, you also buy its faults, legally speaking. Something else we talked about in relation to corporate organizations was shareholder democracy. Now that's an ideal. It's the ideal that the shareholders will be able to vote for the values of the corporation. But of course what we learn is that that's not true. Not everyone has an equal amount of shares. The larger shareholders tend to shout out the lower, the shareholders that hold a fewer amounts of shares. So in fact there is a kind of an elitism that continues within the sphere of the so-called shareholder democracy thesis. And for that reason we do not regard shareholder democracy as a privilege of corporate organizations. So there you go, folks, 50 questions. I hope that was helpful for you. I did give you fairly specific information on some of the questions, and some of the questions I want you guys to do the research on because I think it's important for you. But I think this was a good idea. I hope you are going to do your flashcards and study them, and I hope you will do well in the exam. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing you when you have completed with some good news. Take care now. Bye-bye.